They had pioneered the practice of recording original cast albums of Broadway musicals and were the first to exploit lucrative merchandising tie-ins for their shows, with themed pajamas, dolls, and tropical fashions from South Pacific. Just 3 years earlier, in 1954, the General Foods Corporation had chosen to celebrate its 25th anniversary with an all-star tribute to Rodgers and Hammerstein, a program carried on all 4 extant television networks. Now the boys were aiming even higher, bringing Cinderella to CBS in an effort to top NBC's highly successful live productions of a musical version of Peter Pan, starring Mary Martin, in 1955 and 1956. Their package deal with the network called for them to bear the above-the-board costs of the show, that is, talent, costumes, scenery, and so on, while the network would pay for cameras, lights, sound, and technical equipment. Rodgers and Hammerstein would own the finished show outright, with an option for a single rebroadcast by CBS. And they had scored a casting coup, Julie Andrews, then the hottest star on Broadway, moonlighting from her role as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, to play Cinderella. Rodgers and Hammerstein had first met Andrews 2 years earlier, when she auditioned for a role in what turned out to be their biggest commercial and critical flop, Pipe Dream, a musical set among the raffish characters of John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. Rodgers had sarcastically pronounced her singing absolutely adequate and asked if she was up for other parts. She'd replied that Frederick Loewe and Alan J. Lerner had approached her about a musical version of George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, which they would in fact transform into My Fair Lady. So now a happy reunion was possible, and Andrews managed to squeeze rehearsals for Cinderella into her days and afternoons off. The creative team rounded out the cast with a roster of some of Broadway's most reliable names. Howard Lindsay, the co-author and co-star of Life with Father, to this day the longest-running non-musical play in Broadway history, and his wife, Dorothy Stickney, as the King and Queen, Edie Adams, fresh from her triumph as Daisy May and Lil Abner as the fairy godmother, the comedians Kay Ballard and Alice Ghostly as the stepsisters, Ilka Chase as the stepmother, and an unknown newcomer named John Cipher as the prince. The production floor manager was also just getting a start in show business, but he would go on to big things. Joseph Papp, founder of the New York Shakespeare Festival and the Public Theater. Hammerstein, who wrote the libretto, had kept the Cinderella story simple and sweet. No modern touches, no anachronistic interpolations, no wised-up 20th century idioms. But the logistical demands of the production were daunting. Studio 72, a former Keith Albee Orpheum vaudeville house, and later a movie theater, was a cramped space of just 4,200 square feet, whose orchestra seats had been removed and filled in with concrete to make a level playing surface with the stage. Into this shoebox would have to be fit at least 7 sets, of necessity vertical ones, in tones of lavender and chartreuse, bulky color cameras, dressing areas for men and women, and a walled-off echo chamber for an orchestra that included violins, various woodwinds, horns, and a harp. I just thought it was going to be the greatest train wreck in the history of show business, Adams would recall. To guard against that possibility, a rigorous rehearsal schedule was laid out, including 2 full-scale dress run-throughs that the producers referred to as the New Haven and Boston out-of-town tryouts that were then standard practice for Broadway-bound musicals. At one rehearsal, Rodgers himself, always a stickler for having his music performed exactly as written, interrupted the director, a television veteran named Ralph Nelson. Yes, Mr. Rodgers, what is it?" Nelson asked. "That boy in the second row in the back. You're singing an E-flat instead of an E-natural," Rodgers replied. The special effects were crude by modern standards. A shot of a burning sparkler superimposed over a shot of the fairy godmother to herald her arrival, a comparable effect for the pumpkin-turned carriage, and a system to administer a small shock to the 4 white mice who were about ready to be transformed into horses but had a tendency to grow somnolent in their cage under the hot studio lights. And because of the technical limitations of the time, viewers on the West Coast would not see the full color production at all, only a kinescope, a black-and-white film version shot off a television monitor, which is the record of the evening that survives today. The final run-through ended at 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the broadcast, and a few minutes later Ralph Nelson assembled the cast for a pep talk. "I love television," he told them. "The trouble is, it's the closing night. I want it to be your best performance. I'm worried about people being nervous. It's there in the control room also. I want this performance for myself. Do exactly what I'm expecting you to do. I love you all. If I said anything more, I'd cry." Nelson needn't have worried. There were a few glitches, yes. At one point, Cipher, who would go on to fame as Chief of Police Fletcher Daniels in Hill Street Blues, sang over some lines that were supposed to be